The biting New York wind, a constant companion to Arthur Sterling, whipped around him as he meticulously polished the chrome fender of his pride and joy. A cherry-red 1967 Mustang Fastback, March 2nd, 2025. Saturday afternoons were Arthur's sanctuary, a ritualistic dance between man and machine, a quiet rebellion against the relentless hum of suburban monotony. The garage, a chaotic haven of tools and automotive relics, was his refuge in the affluent but sterile community of Crestwood Estates, just north of Manhattan. Arthur, a recently widowed accountant in his early 60s, found solace in the tangible beauty of the Mustang. It was a rolling monument to a bygone era, a time of raw power and unapologetic style, a stark contrast to the sterile, algorithm-driven world he navigated daily. The car was a testament to his late wife, Eleanor. It was his way of bringing her back, piece by piece, into his everyday life. He often reminisced about the moment he asked her out on a date in this car. To this day, it's his most prized possession. Crestwood Estates was meticulously planned, a testament to order and conformity. Cookie-cutter houses lined perfectly manicured streets, and the Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, dictating everything from lawn height to acceptable paint colors. It was a place for those seeking peace of mind, a predictable haven. Arthur, however, found it increasingly suffocating. The wind howled a mournful tune as Arthur sprayed the polishing compound, the scent of citrus momentarily overpowering the familiar aroma of oil and gasoline. He hummed along to the scratchy jazz emanating from a vintage radio, perched precariously on a stack of old tires, lost in the tactile satisfaction of restoring the car's luster. He often reflected on his journey of discovery to bring it to its current state. The car had many unsolved mysteries that came with it. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the open garage door. Arthur, startled, straightened up, his hand instinctively reaching for a wrench that lay nearby. A woman stood at the edge of his property, a figure radiating disapproval. It was Dolores Umbridge, the self-appointed enforcer of Crestwood's pristine image. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, Dolores' face scrunched up in an expression of perpetual disapproval. She wore a severe dark blue blazer over a pristine white blouse. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned Arthur's property with an air of righteous indignation. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice sharp enough to cut through the wind, "I believe there's a matter we need to discuss regarding the placement of your vehicle." Arthur sighed inwardly. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. Dolores had been a thorn in his side since he moved in 6 months ago, finding fault with everything from his choice of garden gnomes to the unacceptably rustic appearance of his mailbox. He lowered the wrench, his jaw clenched. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Umbridge." "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he said, the sarcasm dripping like motor oil. "Your car, Mr. Sterling, is obstructing the sidewalk." Crestwood Estates Regulation 34B clearly states that all vehicles must be parked entirely within the confines of their designated parking area, she declared, brandishing a laminated copy of the HOA regulations like a weapon. Arthur glanced at the Mustang, which was parked squarely in his driveway, a good 2 feet from the sidewalk. "I believe you'll find that my car is, in fact, on my property, Mrs. Umbridge. I even own this particular area. The sidewalk is still wide enough for several people to use it all at once." Dolores's lips tightened into a thin line. "That may be your interpretation, Mr. Sterling, but the spirit of the regulation is to maintain the aesthetic appeal of our community. Your vintage vehicle detracts from that aesthetic. In fact, it's quite hideous and dirty." Her words, cold as the March wind, pierced Arthur's peaceful Saturday afternoon. Little did he know, this seemingly minor dispute was merely the overture to a symphony of chaos that would soon engulf his life. A thrilling story, and a journey of discovery. The following Monday, a crisp, official-looking envelope landed in Arthur's mailbox. Inside, nestled amongst junk mail and supermarket flyers, was a formal notice of violation from the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. The bold lettering and legalistic jargon practically screamed Dolores Umbridge. Arthur carefully unfolded the document, his blood pressure already rising. The notice cited Regulation 34B, reiterating the obstruction caused by his Mustang and adding a new charge: violation of aesthetic harmony. A fine of $250 was demanded, payable within 14 days. He crumpled the notice in his fist, the paper crackling like dry leaves underfoot. Aesthetic harmony? Was this some kind of twisted joke? He was a man of order, of meticulous detail. It was what made him so good at being an accountant. His car was in pristine condition, and looked far better than any of the other cars within the estates. He needed to talk to her, face to face. Fueled by a simmering rage, Arthur marched across the street to Dolores' perfectly manicured lawn. Her house, a pristine beige colonial, looked as if it had been plucked from a magazine spread. Every shrub was perfectly trimmed, every window gleamed, and the American flag flew proudly from the porch, a symbol of order that felt more like a threat. He rang the doorbell, the chime echoing through the sterile quiet of the neighborhood. The door opened with a precise click, revealing Dolores, her face as unyielding as the regulation she so eagerly enforced. "Mr. Sterling," she greeted him, her tone devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Umbridge," Arthur replied, his voice strained. "I received your notice. I'm here to tell you that I find it completely unwarranted and, frankly, ridiculous." Dolores' thin smile barely reached her eyes. "The regulations are clear, Mr. Sterling. Your vehicle is in violation, and quite frankly, it is an eyesore to our community." "An eyesore? It's a classic car, meticulously restored. It's a work of art," Arthur retorted, his patience wearing thin. "Art is subjective, Mr. Sterling. Regulations are not. And this community operates on regulations." Her gaze was now fixed behind him. "Oh, and I'd like to mention that your grass is a full 2/10 of an inch beyond the approved height. That's another fine. You can't just make this up, Dolores. This is insane. What is your problem?" Arthur boomed out. "My problem, Mr. Sterling, is maintaining the standards of Crestwood Estates. Standards that you, quite frankly, are failing to meet. Your actions are a thrilling story, to be sure, but for the wrong reasons. Your journey of discovery will be finding the bottom of your bank account once you're done paying your fines." Her words were like daggers, aimed to wound. "Those standards are ridiculous. And what's more, your actions are beyond petty. You clearly have a personal vendetta against me. You've had this planned all along," Arthur fumed. "I know you reported me to the city. I know you keyed my car last week. I'm going to find evidence and I'm going to bring you down." Dolores' eyes narrowed. "Such accusations, Mr. Sterling, are not only unfounded but actionable. I suggest you return to your property, pay your fines, and refrain from further harassment. The city is also investigating an unknown code violation." Arthur was stunned and in disbelief, but he was ready to fight back. The game had changed. This wasn't just about a car or a lawn. It was about defending his property, his peace of mind, and his very way of life. He knew this was going to be a long and arduous fight, but he was ready to engage. This wasn't just an unsolved mystery. It was a challenge, and he wouldn't let her get away with it. He stomped off back home. He had to develop a plan. The oppressive atmosphere of Crestwood Estates had settled like a shroud around Arthur Sterling. Sleep offered little respite. Visions of Dolores Umbridge's sneering face and punitive notices danced behind his eyelids. He knew he couldn't simply pay the fines and appease her. That would only embolden her, signaling weakness and inviting further harassment. He had to fight back, but he needed proof. Something concrete to expose Dolores's campaign of terror. It was time to shift from reactive to proactive, to draw a line in the sand. The idea struck him in the middle of a restless night. Security cameras. They were relatively inexpensive and easy to install, offering a silent, unblinking witness to Dolores's activities. He spent the next day researching the best models, prioritizing night vision and discreet placement. By nightfall, 4 small, inconspicuous cameras were strategically positioned around his property, their lenses aimed to capture any unwelcome visitors. The first few nights passed without incident, fueling Arthur's growing self-doubt. Perhaps he was overreacting? Maybe Dolores was just a zealous, if annoying, HOA enthusiast? But he knew in his gut that this was more than just neighborly disagreement. He continued to review the security footage each morning, his hope dwindling with each passing day. Then, on the 4th night, at precisely 2:17 a.m., the motion sensor on the garage camera activated. Arthur, jolted awake by the notification on his phone, fumbled for his glasses and tapped the app. The grainy, black and white image sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. There, shrouded in the shadows, was Dolores Umbridge. She was hunched low, creeping towards his Mustang with a glinting object in her hand. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He could barely breathe. This wasn't about lawn height or parking regulations. This was personal. This was malicious. This was criminal. He watched, frozen, as Dolores reached the car and crouched beside the driver's side door. He could now clearly make out the object in her hand. A key, its jagged edge poised to carve a scar across the Mustang's pristine paint job. Rage, raw and incandescent, surged through Arthur. He wanted to burst out of the house and confront her, but he forced himself to remain calm, to let the cameras record her every move. This was his evidence, his weapon. He watched, every fiber of his being screaming in protest, as Dolores dragged the key along the car door, leaving a deep, jagged scratch in its wake. Satisfied with her handiwork, Dolores straightened up, a smug expression momentarily visible in the dim light, before disappearing back into the shadows. Arthur finally exhaled, the air hissing through his teeth. He now had what he needed. He immediately called the police, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and triumph. "I have irrefutable evidence of vandalism. The perpetrator is Dolores Umbridge, and she's been harassing me for weeks. This has been a thrilling story of lawlessness, and I'm not going to take it anymore." Within minutes, a patrol car arrived, its flashing lights cutting through the quiet darkness of Crestwood Estates. Arthur, still shaking, led the officers to his laptop, where he played the security footage. The officers watched in stunned silence, their faces hardening with each passing second. "That's pretty damning, Mr. Sterling," the lead officer finally said. "We'll need to speak with Mrs. Umbridge." Arthur, accompanied by the officers, walked across the street to Dolores's house. The officers knocked loudly on the door. After a prolonged delay, Dolores answered, her face etched with annoyance. "Officers," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "to what do I owe this unpleasant intrusion?" "Mrs. Umbridge, we need to ask you some questions about an incident of vandalism that occurred at Mr. Sterling's property," the officer replied, his tone firm. Dolores feigned surprise. "Vandalism? I assure you, officers, I have no knowledge of such a thing. I was at home, asleep, all night. We have security footage, Mrs. Umbridge, showing you keying Mr. Sterling's car," the officer stated bluntly. Dolores' composure faltered for a fraction of a second before she quickly regained control. That's absurd. That footage must be doctored. I would never do such a thing." But Arthur could see the lie flicker in her eyes. "We'll let the courts decide that, Mrs. Umbridge," the officer said. "You're coming with us." As the officers placed handcuffs on Dolores, Arthur allowed himself a small grim smile. The unsolved mystery of who was vandalizing his car was finally solved, and the wheels of justice were beginning to turn. He had drawn a line, and Dolores Umbridge had crossed it. The arrest of Dolores Umbridge sent ripples of shock and whispers of relief throughout Crestwood Estates. Arthur Sterling, once just another quiet widower tending to his vintage car, had become an unlikely figure of rebellion, a symbol of resistance against the neighborhood bully. Yet, despite the undeniable satisfaction of seeing Dolores in handcuffs, Arthur knew the battle wasn't over. He had a feeling that Dolores had friends in the HOA. The legal process would take time, and he needed to gather more evidence, more witnesses to paint a complete picture of Dolores's reign of terror. He started by reaching out to his neighbors, particularly those who had seemed most affected by Dolores's pronouncements. It wasn't easy. Many were hesitant, fearful of attracting Dolores's wrath even from behind bars. Arthur started with Mr. Henderson, an elderly gentleman who lived next door. Mr. Henderson was a fixture on the street, known for his meticulous gardening and taciturn nature. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur began cautiously, catching him tending to his rose bushes, "I was wondering if you might have had any experiences with Mrs. Umbridge in the past." Mr. Henderson straightened up, his eyes narrowed behind his thick glasses. "Dolores," he said, the name dripping with disdain. "That woman's been a menace to this neighborhood for years. Always meddling, always judging. She even tried to get me fined for having unapproved bird feeders." Arthur listened intently as Mr. Henderson recounted a litany of petty grievances, each one seemingly more absurd than the last. Fines for misplaced garbage cans, warnings about excessive holiday decorations, even complaints about the color of his shutters. I just learned to ignore her, Mr. Henderson confessed, his voice laced with resignation. It wasn't worth the trouble. Now, seeing all of these acts come to light is like seeing a real thrilling story in my backyard. Emboldened by Mr. Henderson's willingness to speak, Arthur approached Sylvia Green, a young mother who lived across the street. Sylvia had always seemed friendly, but Arthur had sensed a quiet apprehension in her demeanor. He caught her struggling to unload groceries from her car, two small children clinging to her legs. "Sylvia, could I lend a hand?" Arthur offered. "I was also hoping I could talk with you." Sylvia accepted his help gratefully. As they carried the groceries inside, Arthur broached the subject of Dolores. Sylvia's face immediately clouded over. "Oh, that woman," she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "She made my life a living hell when we first moved in." Sylvia recounted how Dolores had relentlessly harassed her about her children playing too loudly, about the placement of her Christmas lights, even about the brand of her stroller. She kept saying the color was inconsistent with the rest of the neighborhood. It was awful. Her actions were worse than some unsolved mystery. The worst was when Dolores had called Child Protective Services with an anonymous complaint, claiming Sylvia was neglecting her children. The investigation had been unfounded, but the emotional toll had been immense. "I felt so helpless, so vulnerable," Sylvia confessed, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't know what to do. Nobody wanted to get involved. I felt like I was all alone." These conversations had Arthur feeling more and more that Dolores had gotten out of hand for far too long. "Well, I'm not letting anyone get away with it. With your help we can take down the HOA and its terrible actions." Armed with these accounts, Arthur decided to take his case to the HOA board. He attended the next meeting, hoping to present his evidence and demand action. However, he was met with polite but firm resistance. The board members, mostly elderly and seemingly indifferent, expressed their concern about the unfortunate situation, but insisted that it was a matter for the courts. "We can't take sides, Mr. Sterling," the HOA president, a portly man named Councilman Theodore Ted Lawson, explained. "We have to remain neutral. There's also a certain amount of red tape." Arthur saw little in his eyes, but his actions spoke louder than his words. Arthur left the meeting frustrated and disillusioned. The HOA, it seemed, was more interested in protecting its own image than in addressing the very real harm Dolores had inflicted on the community. But he wouldn't give up. He knew that he had the truth on his side, and he wouldn't rest until justice was served. He had new allies, and they gave him new resolve to continue his journey. He would see this thrilling story to its conclusion. With Dolores Umbridge behind bars, Arthur Sterling had hoped for a semblance of peace, a chance to catch his breath and return to the comforting routine of his life. But the malevolent influence of Dolores, like a stubborn weed, refused to be eradicated. The sense of unease that had plagued him for months intensified, morphing into a gnawing anxiety that clung to him like a shroud. It began subtly. Strange phone calls in the middle of the night, the line silent save for a faint, rhythmic breathing. Anonymous letters filled with veiled threats and cryptic messages slipped under his door. These were followed by more overt acts of vandalism. His mailbox smashed, his garden uprooted, his windows splattered with eggs. Arthur meticulously documented each incident, his frustration growing with each passing day. He reported everything to the police, but with Dolores already incarcerated, there was little they could do. The incidents were minor, difficult to trace, and impossible to link directly to Dolores. It was as if she were orchestrating a campaign of harassment from within the prison walls, a puppet master pulling strings in the shadows. "This is getting out of control, Arthur," Sylvia Green said, her voice laced with concern, as they stood surveying the damage to his garden. "She's still managing to terrorize you, even from prison." "I know," Arthur replied, his jaw clenched. "I just don't understand how. She's like a phantom, haunting this neighborhood even from behind bars." He spent countless nights poring over HOA documents, city ordinances, and legal codes, searching for any loophole, any regulation that Dolores could exploit to further her agenda of harassment. He considered moving, fleeing Crestwood Estates and leaving behind the memories of Eleanor and the vintage world she loved. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. Leaving felt like admitting defeat, like surrendering to Dolores' tyranny. The incidents escalated. One morning Arthur woke to find his water had been shut off. He called the city, only to discover that a complaint had been filed, claiming he was illegally draining the municipal water supply for his gardening. Another day he received a notice from the building inspector, stating that his garage was in violation of several obscure safety codes. Each complaint was anonymous, but Arthur knew who was behind it. "She's trying to bankrupt you, Arthur," Mr. Henderson said grimly, as they stood discussing the latest notice. "She wants to bleed you dry, force you to leave." Arthur realized Mr. Henderson was right. Dolores wasn't just trying to annoy him. She was waging a war of attrition, attempting to make his life so miserable, so financially draining, that he would have no choice but to surrender. He couldn't live like this. Sleep became a luxury. His weight plummeted. The unsolved mystery of how to stop her consumed his every thought. Arthur started considering drastic actions. If the police couldn't protect him, maybe he had to take the law into his own hands. He began researching private investigators, exploring options for legal retaliation, even contemplating a restraining order. Arthur was also tempted to fight fire with fire, to retaliate against Dolores in kind. But he knew that would be playing into her hands, stooping to her level. He would not, under any circumstances, become like her. He was a man of order, a man of law. He had to find a way to stop Dolores's campaign of terror, to expose her network of accomplices, and to bring her to justice once and for all. A thrilling story was about to begin with even more twists and turns. One evening, while reviewing security footage from a particularly unsettling night, Arthur noticed something he had previously overlooked. A dark sedan parked down the street, its lights off, idling for hours. He zoomed in, enhanced the image, and recognized the license plate. It belonged to a car registered to one of Dolores' distant cousins. A new plan formed in Arthur's mind, a daring and dangerous plan, a plan that could finally end Dolores Umbridge's reign of terror. The dark sedan idling down the street, a phantom in the night, became Arthur Sterling's obsession. The license plate, belonging to Dolores Umbridge's distant cousin, Jared, was the key that unlocked a new understanding of her continued harassment. Arthur realized she wasn't working alone. She had accomplices on the outside, carrying out her orders from behind bars. It was time for a sting. Arthur knew he had to proceed carefully. He couldn't alert Jared or Dolores, or risk jeopardizing his plan. He spent days meticulously gathering information, piecing together a timeline of events, correlating the incidents of vandalism with Jared's movements. He felt like he was lost in an unsolved mystery as well. He started feeling more and more like he was a detective. He enlisted the help of Mr. Henderson and Sylvia Green, sharing his findings and outlining his strategy. Mr. Henderson, surprisingly, proved to be a valuable asset, his years of experience in the neighborhood giving him a keen understanding of its rhythms and patterns. Sylvia, emboldened by Arthur's resolve, offered her support without hesitation. The plan was simple, yet audacious. Arthur would lure Jared into a trap, capturing him in the act of committing a crime, providing irrefutable evidence of his connection to Dolores, and exposing their network of harassment. It was a risky gamble, but Arthur saw no other way to end Dolores's reign of terror. He started by subtly increasing the visibility of his Mustang, parking it in a more exposed location, almost daring Jared to vandalize it. He also made sure his security cameras were prominently displayed, hoping to lure Jared into a false sense of security, making him believe he could outsmart them. Then he waited. The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that weighed on Arthur's every move. He barely slept, spending his nights glued to his security monitors, his nerves stretched thin. Finally, on the third night, Jared took the bait. At precisely 3:14 a.m., the dark sedan crept slowly down the street, its headlights off. Arthur, alerted by the motion sensors, watched intently as Jared parked a block away and emerged from the car, his face hidden beneath a hooded sweatshirt. Jared crept stealthily towards Arthur's Mustang, carrying a can of spray paint. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest, his hands trembling slightly. This was it. He alerted the police, providing them with Jared's description and location. As Jared approached the car, Arthur activated the floodlights, bathing the street in a blinding glare. Jared froze, startled, his eyes wide with panic. Arthur emerged from his house, his face grim, his voice booming across the quiet night. "Gotcha, Jared. I knew you would show up. Jared, realizing he had been caught, bolted, sprinting back towards his car. But Arthur was ready. Mr. Henderson, armed with a baseball bat, emerged from his house, cutting off Jared's escape route. Sylvia, meanwhile, stood on her porch, filming the entire scene with her phone. It was a thrilling story unfolding before their eyes. The police arrived moments later, sirens blaring, lights flashing. Jared, realizing he was trapped, surrendered without a fight. As the officers handcuffed him and led him away, Arthur allowed himself a small, grim smile. He had done it. He had orchestrated a perfect sting, exposing Dolores Umbridge's network of harassment and bringing her accomplice to justice. Yet, despite the undeniable satisfaction of this victory, a sense of unease lingered in Arthur's heart. He knew that even with Jared behind bars, Dolores's influence might still extend beyond the prison walls. The battle, he feared, was far from over. He had dismantled one card in her house of cards, but more were sure to follow. The news of Jared's arrest reverberated through Crestwood Estates, bringing a brief respite from the oppressive atmosphere that had gripped the community. Arthur Sterling, hailed as a local hero, found himself the recipient of grateful smiles and appreciative gestures. Yet, beneath the surface of newfound peace, a sense of foreboding lingered, a premonition that Dolores Umbridge's malevolent reach extended far beyond the prison walls. Arthur's intuition proved chillingly accurate. Just when he started to believe that he could finally reclaim his life, the harassment escalated, becoming more insidious and targeted. It was as if Dolores, confined to a cell, had amplified her influence, transforming her hatred into a weapon wielded by unseen hands. The first sign was a wave of anonymous complaints targeting Arthur. He received notices from the city for alleged building code violations, noise complaints, and even accusations of animal neglect. He didn't even own a pet. Each complaint was frivolous, easily dismissed, but they consumed his time and resources, forcing him to navigate a bureaucratic labyrinth of inspections and hearings. Then came the personal attacks. His bank account was hacked, resulting in a temporary freeze on his assets. His credit card was declined at the grocery store, causing him public embarrassment. Someone even filed a false report with the IRS, triggering an audit that threatened to expose his finances to unwanted scrutiny. "This is her, Arthur," Sylvia Green said, her voice laced with fear, as they stood surveying the latest round of vandalism. "A slashed tire on the Mustang. She's still managing to get to you, even from behind bars." Arthur, his face etched with exhaustion, nodded grimly. "I know. It's like she has eyes everywhere, manipulating events from her prison cell. I need a thrilling story on how to stop her." He discovered that Dolores was in frequent contact with her nephews, Jared's younger brother, Emmett. Emmett, it turned out, was just as devoted to her reign as Jared. He also harbored an even greater resentment towards Arthur for being a snitch. Arthur tried to get to Emmett, but found it difficult. He found out he was at a dead end, however. He felt like this was an unsolved mystery that wouldn't have a clean resolve. "She's using them to carry out her orders," Mr. Henderson concluded, his voice grim. "They're her proxies, her enforcers." That's when the incidents went too far. One evening, as Arthur was returning home from a late-night meeting, he noticed two figures lurking near his garage. As he approached, they started yelling and threatening. They pulled out knives and tried to steal his Mustang. "Get out of here or you will regret it," Arthur yelled in the face of the men. They began swiping at him. He could not believe what was happening to him. It was one thing to slash tires or damage his garden, but this was a direct threat to his life. Arthur didn't understand it. Why was Dolores terrorizing him? Had he become too consumed in the day-to-day tasks? Would he be able to live a long life as long as Dolores was plotting against him? What was Dolores's ultimate goal? It all didn't add up to him, and he could not understand it. Then it hit him. This wasn't necessarily about him. It was about Dolores's need for power. It was about her being obsessed with getting what she wanted. This time, Arthur had to take things into his own hands. He called the police, but told them to arrive only if the situation became deadly. He had to make sure. The sight of those knives glinting in the dim streetlights shattered Arthur Sterling's remaining sense of security. The realization that Dolores Umbridge, even from behind bars, was capable of ordering an assault on his person sent a chilling wave of vulnerability through him. The subtle acts of harassment, the bureaucratic annoyances, all paled in comparison to the raw, visceral threat he had just faced. He managed to fend off the attackers with nothing more than harsh language and his imposing figure. As the two men ran off, Arthur looked directly into the eyes of one of them. He knew he needed to report the incident to the police. This had gone too far. As he sat on the porch steps that night, he could not help but shed a few tears. The police took the incident seriously, assigning a detective to the case and increasing patrols in Crestwood Estates. But Arthur knew that police protection could only go so far. He had to take matters into his own hands to find a way to sever Dolores's connection to the outside world, to shut down her network of enforcers. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Arthur transformed his home into a fortress, reinforcing doors and windows, installing additional security cameras, and even purchasing a firearm, a weapon he had never imagined owning. He started experiencing night terrors that sent shivers down his spine. The paranoia grew, poisoning his relationships with Mr. Henderson and Sylvia. He became suspicious of everyone, questioning their motives, seeing potential threats in every shadow. He was no longer a protector, but someone at risk of attacking anyone who looked at him wrong. Then one night, as Arthur was reviewing security footage, he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Dolores Umbridge, walking casually down his driveway. It was as if this was an unsolved mystery that he would never put an end to. It was as if Dolores's image was etched into his subconsciousness. He double-checked the date and time. He was not wrong. This was happening as he watched it live. How could this be? Had she escaped from prison? Was this some sort of elaborate hallucination? As she got closer, he noticed an object in her hand. It was a gasoline can and some matches. His security feed then went dead. Rage consumed him. He ran outside to discover that Dolores had started to light his Mustang on fire. "Arthur," she yelled, "it's time to come face to face with your maker." "Dolores, what are you doing?" he yelled. He thought she was in jail. Was he dreaming? "You can't get away with this," Dolores yelled. "I will make you suffer." Arthur, though startled, tried to remain calm. He had a plan that had been brewing. He did not understand where Dolores had come from and what she was doing. The cops were nowhere nearby. "Dolores, you are not well. You need help," Arthur shouted as he began walking toward her. "Help? I don't need help. I have been wronged." "The least you can do is suffer with me," she exclaimed. Arthur continued getting closer and closer. He feinted right and then quickly swiped left, kicking Dolores to the ground. He jumped on top of her and restrained her. Despite her best efforts, after what felt like an eternity, the police arrived. "What is going on here?" they exclaimed. "How did she get here?" Arthur had no idea. But she was now in their custody. The officers brought Dolores back into the jail and then came back to Arthur. "We're going to ask you some questions later, but you did a good job of subduing her. That's not what is important," Arthur replied. "The important part is that she will never do this again. This has been the thrilling story of my life, and I'm the one who is going to write the ending." The news of Dolores Umbridge's escape and attempted arson rippled through Crestwood Estates and beyond, transforming Arthur Sterling from a local hero into a national symbol of resilience. News outlets, hungry for a thrilling story, descended upon the quiet suburban community, broadcasting Arthur's harrowing tale to a captivated nation. But Arthur, weary of the attention, focused on a single goal: ensuring Dolores Umbridge never again threatened his life or the peace of his community. This was an unsolved mystery that needed an explanation. The public had a right to know about her deeds. This was about securing justice. The investigation into Dolores's escape and continued harassment quickly gained momentum. Already spurred by public outrage and media scrutiny, launched a full-scale inquiry into her prison contacts, financial dealings, and network of accomplices. It was as if her house of cards was teetering. It turned out that Dolores had bribed a corrupt prison guard, a disgruntled officer with a gambling addiction, to smuggle in cell phones, provide her with information, and relay her orders to the outside world. That officer was immediately brought to justice as well. The investigation also revealed that Dolores had been siphoning money from a secret bank account, funds she had accumulated over years of manipulating HOA regulations and extorting homeowners. The most damning evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. Emmett and Jared, Dolores's own nephews. Faced with mounting evidence of their involvement in her criminal activities and fearing lengthy prison sentences, the brothers decided to cut a deal with the prosecution. They confessed everything, detailing Dolores's meticulous planning, her manipulative tactics, and her unwavering obsession with control. Emmett and Jared described how Dolores had contacted them from prison, instructing them to escalate the harassment against Arthur, promising them financial rewards and showering them with praise for their loyalty. They revealed how she had orchestrated the vandalism, the threatening phone calls, and the attempted arson, all from the confines of her cell. She said it was a holy war, Emmett testified, his voice trembling with remorse. She said Arthur Sterling was a threat to the community, a cancer that needed to be eradicated. With their testimony, the prosecution had a rock-solid case against Dolores Umbridge. She was charged with a litany of new crimes, including conspiracy, attempted murder, and witness tampering. The trial media circus was swift and decisive. The evidence against Dolores was overwhelming, and the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, delivering a scathing sentence, condemned Dolores for her unwavering malice and her unrepentant abuse of power. He sentenced her to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. This chapter in the area was over. As Dolores was led away, her face contorted with rage, Arthur Sterling felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. He no longer had to fear for his safety, for the safety of his neighbors. He no longer had to live in a constant state of alert. He had been proven to be a protector, not someone at risk. But even in his relief, Arthur felt a twinge of sadness for Dolores Umbridge. He pitied a woman so consumed by hatred, so desperate for control, that she had destroyed her own life and brought misery to so many others. In that moment, Arthur understood that true strength lay not in dominance or manipulation, but in compassion and forgiveness. The neighborhood could start to heal. Now it was time for Dolores to start her journey of discovery. The news of Dolores Umbridge's escape and attempted arson rippled through Crestwood Estates and beyond, transforming Arthur Sterling from a local hero into a national symbol of resilience. News outlets, hungry for a thrilling story, descended upon the quiet suburban community, broadcasting Arthur's harrowing tale to a captivated nation. But Arthur, weary of the attention, focused on a single goal: ensuring Dolores Umbridge never again threatened his life or the peace of his community. This was an unsolved mystery that needed an explanation. The public had a right to know about her deeds. This was about securing justice. The investigation into Dolores's escape and continued harassment quickly gained momentum. Authorities, spurred by public outrage and media scrutiny, launched a full-scale inquiry into her prison contacts, financial dealings, and network of accomplices. It was as if her house of cards was teetering. It turned out that Dolores had bribed a corrupt prison guard, a disgruntled officer with a gambling addiction, to smuggle in cell phones, provide her with information, and relay her orders to the outside world. That officer was immediately brought to justice as well. The investigation also revealed that Dolores had been siphoning money from a secret bank account, funds she had accumulated over years of manipulating HOA regulations and extorting homeowners. The most damning evidence, however, came from an unexpected source: Emmett and Jared, Dolores's own nephews. Faced with mounting evidence of their involvement in her criminal activities and fearing lengthy prison sentences, the brothers decided to cut a deal with the prosecution. They confessed everything, detailing Dolores's meticulous planning, her manipulative tactics, and her unwavering obsession with control. Emmett and Jared described how Dolores had contacted them from prison, instructing them to escalate the harassment against Arthur, promising them financial rewards and showering them with praise for their loyalty. They revealed how she had orchestrated the vandalism, the threatening phone calls, and the attempted arson, all from the confines of her cell. She said it was a holy war, Emmett testified, his voice trembling with remorse. She said Arthur Sterling was a threat to the community, a cancer that needed to be eradicated. With their testimony, the prosecution had a rock-solid case against Dolores Umbridge. She was charged with a litany of new crimes, including conspiracy, attempted murder, and witness tampering. The trial, a media circus, was swift and decisive. The evidence against Dolores was overwhelming, and the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, delivering a scathing sentence, condemned Dolores for her unwavering malice and her unrepentant abuse of power. He sentenced her to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. This chapter in the area was over. As Dolores was led away, her face contorted with rage, Arthur Sterling felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. He no longer had to fear for his safety, for the safety of his neighbors. He no longer had to live in a constant state of alert. He had been proven to be a protector, not someone at risk. But even in his relief, Arthur felt a twinge of sadness for Dolores Umbridge. He pitied a woman so consumed by hatred, so desperate for control, that she had destroyed her own life and brought misery to so many others. In that moment, Arthur understood that true strength lay not in dominance or manipulation, but in compassion and forgiveness. The neighborhood could start to heal. Now it was time for Dolores to start her journey of discovery. 9.6 Is edit more ver. Write the content for HP, Chapter 10. Liberation O Summary. The HOA reforms, the community bonds, and Arthur reflects on his journey from reluctant participant to community hero. O Character Focus. It showcases Arthur embracing his role as a champion of the community, while also reclaiming his personal peace and tranquility. Required word count, 1,000 words. Edit more ver. Chapter 10. Liberation. The imprisonment of Dolores Umbridge marked not just the end of Arthur Sterling's personal ordeal, but the dawn of a new era for Crestwood Estates. The reign of terror, the constant fear, the suffocating atmosphere of control, all of it dissipated like fog under the morning sun. A collective sigh of relief swept through the community, a sense of liberation that had been unimaginable just months before. The most immediate change was the reformation of the Homeowners Association. Councilman Theodore Ted Lawson, humbled by the exposure of Dolores's corruption and the overwhelming public outcry, resigned from his position, paving the way for a new board comprised of ordinary residents committed to transparency and fairness. Sylvia Green, emboldened by her newfound voice and driven by a desire to prevent future abuses, spearheaded the campaign for reform. She rallied her neighbors, drafting new HOA regulations that emphasized community input, limited the board's power, and protected individual property rights. She became a protector, not someone in danger. Mr. Henderson, lending his experience and wisdom, served as a voice of reason, ensuring the new regulations were practical and balanced. He had been living there for a while and knew what the community truly needed. Arthur Sterling, reluctant to assume a leadership role, served as an informal advisor, sharing his insights from his own experiences and reminding everyone of the importance of vigilance and integrity. He had come too far to let it fall to the wayside. The unsolved mystery was over, but he had to stay alert. Under their guidance, the HOA transformed from a symbol of oppression into a force for good, fostering a sense of community spirit and cooperation that had been absent for years. The oppressive rules and regulations that had stifled creativity and individuality were repealed, replaced by guidelines that encouraged harmony and respect. The atmosphere in Crestwood Estates began to change. Lawns, once meticulously manicured and identical, blossomed with personal touches, colorful flowers, whimsical garden ornaments, and even, in a daring act of defiance, a collection of brightly painted lawn gnomes. Houses once painted in muted, HOA-approved colors began to sport more vibrant hues, reflecting the personalities of their owners. Children, once confined to designated play areas and silenced by noise restrictions, now roamed freely, their laughter echoing through the streets, filling the community with joy. Neighbors, once suspicious and wary, started to connect, sharing stories, organizing block parties, and lending each other a helping hand. Arthur Sterling, once a recluse drawn to Crestwood Estates by its promise of peace and quiet, found himself at the center of this newfound community, a reluctant hero who had inspired his neighbors to stand up for what was right. He was no longer trying to seek solutions to the thrilling story of his and Dolores' feud. He was finally living the life he wanted. Yet, despite the praise and admiration, Arthur remained grounded, focusing on reclaiming his own sense of peace and tranquility. He spent his days tending to his garden, restoring his Mustang, and reconnecting with the memories of his late wife, Eleanor. He could feel her again. One evening as Arthur sat on his porch, sipping a glass of iced tea and listening to the gentle hum of the cicadas. Sylvia Green approached him, a warm smile gracing her face. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You saved us all." Arthur smiled back, his heart filled with a sense of contentment he hadn't felt in years. "We saved each other, Sylvia," he replied. As he watched the sun set over Crestwood Estates, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Arthur realized that he had not only liberated his community from the tyranny of Dolores Umbridge, but he had also liberated himself. He had discovered his own strength, his own voice, and his own capacity for compassion. He had found a new purpose in his life: to protect the vulnerable, to stand up for what is right, and to create a community where everyone could thrive. The life he was living was better than an unsolved mystery, and better than a thrilling story. It was real. It was home. From Arthur Sterling's journey in Crestwood Estates, powerful life lessons emerge. First, never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right, even when facing a seemingly insurmountable challenge. Arthur's initial reluctance gave way to resolute action, reminding us that courage often begins with a small step. Next, cultivate supportive relationships. They're vital in overcoming adversity. Arthur found strength in Mr. Henderson, Sylvia, demonstrating that community is a shield against isolation and a catalyst for resilience. Also, document everything. It is more important than feelings. A well-documented paper trail will prove more important. Never allow your feelings to compromise justice. Remember, the road to personal growth is paved with both triumphs and setbacks. Finally, understand that true liberation comes not just from defeating external threats, but from conquering our own fears and embracing compassion. By integrating these practices, one can grow through adversity.